the chair of Slovenia. Thank you very much for your invitation to speak in your culture centre in Ljubljani. I was last here in 1966. And I am delighted to be back again. And I feel very much at home because I come from a country that I think may be slightly smaller than yours. And that is Northern Ireland. And I always feel as I travel around the world that there's a sympathy between people who come from small countries. But I'm not going to go into the difficulties associated with that philosophical concept. And looking, I'm so encouraged to see so many of you here, which is a tribute to all the hard work that's been done by the organisers. But is also an indication of the interest in these topics. And I discover virtually in every country I go to that similar audiences come. I'm certainly not like the bishop in England who was visiting a little country church on his annual visit. And as he climbed up into the pulpit, he noticed there were only 3 old people in the audience. And just behind him was the local minister, and he whispered to him, and he said, "Did you tell them I was coming?" And the local minister said, "No, but word seems to have got around." So I'm delighted I'm not like that. And you've given me a very interesting title. And I'm grateful again to whoever translated the version of the talk that I sent in advance. What I say tonight will be similar and related, I hope. But there is more in the little booklet that you have been given than I will be able to say. And that's a very good thing, because what I'm looking forward to tonight is the end of my talk and the opportunity to listen to your questions. That's always for me the most interesting part. So please do write your questions out, and we'll try to answer as many of them as we can. The title you've given me is the Higgs boson, God of the Gaps. And for those of us in England, 2 weeks ago it was very exciting to learn that Peter Higgs had been awarded the Nobel Prize. Many years ago he predicted that there would be a special particle. And during the years afterwards, a lot of work has gone into, first of all, working out the mathematics, and then using the vastly expensive instruments in CERN in Geneva, culminating in the discovery of the Higgs boson. It is a theme that is very up to date. This is Austria's leading weekly magazine. It appeared yesterday. And it was handed to me about an hour before I gave a lecture in the Technical University in Vienna. Schöpfung ohne Gott, creation without God, no question mark, no full stop, but it is about the Higgs boson. Interestingly, some people have called the Higgs boson the God particle. Professor Higgs does not like that description. And I don't like it either, and no serious scientist likes it. Professor Higgs is an atheist, I am a Christian believer. But we share that idea that calling it the God particle is actually very silly. It is a very exciting discovery. And as this article suggests, It's not the end of physics, it's the beginning of a new era in physics. As the last building block, so it is believed, fitting into the standard model and giving some kind of explanation of how it is that mass exists. Now, these concepts are extremely difficult, and I am not presuming that you know mathematics or physics. I speak to you as a pure mathematician. I did study theoretical physics at Cambridge many years ago. But what I want to do is to talk to you not about the details of the science, but about the implications and the conclusions that people are drawing from the science. And I hope that that's going to be accessible to everyone. Not long ago, I received an invitation to go to Geneva, to serve, to engage with about 50 physicists who worked on the Higgs problem, mathematicians, philosophers, some theologians. And the idea was, can we find a language to talk to each other? And this is very interesting because it had never happened before. The director of CERN, who stayed for the whole conference, was interested in the philosophical and theological implications, if any, of this discovery. And we had a fascinating few days. And it was rapidly perceived that although we all shared the same commitment to science, we had very different underlying worldviews. Now, in orientating ourselves in this debate, because the title of this magazine, Creation Without God, seems at least to remind us of a tension or a conflict that exists in many people's minds. Indeed, it is the title of my book, Has Science Buried God? I want to suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that there is a deeper question in a way. The conflict, and there is a real one, is not between science and belief in God. After all, we owe modern science to belief in God. That may surprise some of you. But it is the fact, and is supported by many of my colleagues who are historians of science, that if you look at the 17th century and you think about science arising under people like Galileo, Kepler, Newton, and so on, they were all believers in God. And there is a connection, as was expressed by Sir Alfred North Whitehead, a brilliant historian and philosopher of science. And summing up what he said, C.S. Lewis wrote, men became scientific. Why? Because they expected law in nature. And they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. That is, it was belief in God as the underlying worldview that was the motor that drove the rise of contemporary science. Let me put that in a slightly provocative way. I am not remotely ashamed to say to you tonight that I am both a scientist and a Christian, because arguably Christianity gave me my subject. So what has happened in the meantime? Because behind our title, the Higgs boson, God of the Gaps, is the contemporary feeling in the West and in the academy that somehow science and God don't belong together. And I want to suggest that they do belong together, but that the conflict, and there's a real conflict, is between two world views. You can see that. Peter Higgs, brilliant physicist, Nobel Prize winner 2013. He's an atheist. William Phillips, whom I met not long ago in Oxford, is a brilliant physicist too, Nobel Prize winner. And he's a Christian. Now that ought to tell us something. What does it tell us? It tells us that the real problem cannot lie between science and belief in God. No. The difference between those two distinguished Nobel Prize winners is not their science, it's their worldview. One is a Christian, a theist who believes in God, and the other is an atheist. So the real question is, where does science sit? Does it really point towards atheism? Or does it, as Isaac Newton and Kepler and Galileo and Clark Maxwell believe, does it point towards God? And we can ask questions about the evidence for that as we go along. So I think we need to get rid of this idea that science and belief in God are in essential conflict. There are equally distinguished scientists in our world who are atheists and who are not atheists, who are theists. So that's the start of the situation. And it was very fascinating to me to engage in discussion with people who were actually involved in setting up the particle accelerator and in discovering the Higgs boson. And I'm going to share with you some things that scientists are saying. Now, Stephen Hawking is arguably the most famous living scientist. For many years, he left us in suspense. One didn't really know whether he left a little space for God or not, until recently, when he co-authored a book called The Grand Design with Leonard Nobinov, in which he clearly states his atheism. And it hit the headlines all around the world. Stephen Hawking says physics leaves no room for God, and so on. So, according to him, there's no space for God because the laws of physics are the real explanation of the existence of the universe. More recently, Lawrence Krauss, a professor of physics at Arizona State University, very well known for his book, A Universe from Nothing, and he was another of the participants at this conference. When he read about the Higgs, wrote an article in one of the British newspapers saying that the Higgs boson is arguably more important than God. And I was tempted and gave in to the temptation. I wrote a reply to that appeared in the London Times, and you can see it on the internet. The Higgs boson is arguably more important than God. Is that true? What could that kind of thing mean? Well, let's first look at the idea that stands behind it. As I travel around, particularly the West, I discover that in many universities and in the media and among the population, there is an impression that science is now the only way to truth. The only really reliable way to get knowledge about our world is through science. Now, science has an immense cultural authority, and rightly so. We are all so grateful. There might even be people sitting twittering and tweeting as I'm talking to them here on all these marvelous iPhones and everything else. We're all very grateful to science and technology. But it's very important, ladies and gentlemen, to realize that there is more to the world than science.